Welcome to the ESPN Esports channel. This is the ECO, our new Counter-Strike Global Offensive show. I believe this is episode 4, if I am not mistaken. My name is Jacob Wolf, and I am your host this evening as we talk all things Counter-Strike Global Offensive. And it's been a couple weeks since we've seen you. If you only watch this show and not our other programming, you will notice I am in a new room, which currently is darker than previously. But also there's no more cat tree, no more window. That would be because I moved in across the country in the middle of a pandemic from New York to Austin, Texas. It's been an adventure the past few weeks, including today, which, as you probably noticed, my hair is not done if you pay attention to any of me, and that would be because I had to take a quick shower because I've been deflaying a newborn kitten I found today. Been an interesting day and an interesting past couple of weeks, but Counter-Strike has also been interesting nonetheless. Tonight we're going to be joined by the Gen G head coach, Elma Puddy, who is going to be waiting here on the line for us momentarily. We also did an interview earlier today with Kasper Hvidt, the director of sport at the Astralis group. They own Astralis, they own Origin, and they own Future FC. Kasper talked to us a little bit about the decision to bring on Hugi to the team as the 7th man, the transition into what he hopes eventually will be 10-man rosters in Counter-Strike Global Offensive. And then we have one other item we have to address. Over the weekend, this weekend, FaZe Banks, one of the co-owners of FaZe, finally addressed for the first time, I believe, in 4 years, that he was the owner, one of the owners of CSGO Wild, one of the skins gambling websites on the internet back during that whole debacle in 2016 and 2017, if you remember. He had said that he wasn't a part of that, but I have very strong capital O opinions on that matter when we get to it. But first, we are going to welcome in Elma Puddy. He is the head coach of Gen G, the winners of the North American leg of Road to Rio. Rising Star team. Elma Puddy, how is things going for you there?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Where are you right now? Are you in LA or are you elsewhere? Where are you abouts?
Yeah, in LA. Actually in the Gen G office currently, just across the road from the apartments we've been hooked up with, so it's really sweet.
Just on that note while we're at it, because I've asked every guest this, because especially people in Los Angeles, because it's been difficult, how are you handling coronavirus situation with you and the team?
I think just extra careful. We only have a couple of players here now with me in the office. We obviously sent Daps, Som, and Automatic are all home. It's just me, Benta, and Kusta here at the office at the moment. So we're just extra careful wearing masks and stuff most of the time. Lots of hand sanitizer around. But besides that, I mean, we're just coming to the office. Like, not much has changed from my routine, really. I just go from the apartment, come here, get to work, watch CS, watch demos, and yeah, I mean, I haven't really noticed a massive change, if I'm being honest.
Well, one thing has certainly changed is your competitions, right? Is the format is shaken up. We would be getting ready, I believe, if I have the schedule right, we would be getting ready for the major at this point. I believe the early qualifiers would have been going on in Brazil right now. They are not, though, obviously, because of the global pandemic. And, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was because Gen G kind of hit their stride right before all of this happened. Obviously, you guys have played well online, as seen by the Road to Rio Major qualifier, RMR event that you just won. But you were doing that offline as well with DH Anaheim, and it seemed like that was going to continue with some events. This team was improving rapidly together. Do you think this sort of crisis has stunted your momentum at all, or you feel like it's still chugging along even over the internet?
I think initially it did definitely stunt our momentum. Like, as you said, we came to that DreamHack Anaheim event very hot. Obviously, it is a little bit easy when you come in as a brand new team. People don't really know any of your strategies. There's none of your demos out for people to watch. So there's obviously that advantage coming to Anaheim. But I think it was quite obvious going back into Flashpoint. The competition there wasn't like the best in the world, and we faltered against teams we definitely should have beaten. I think, yeah, as I said, that definitely stunted us. Not having everyone all together makes it difficult to just kind of build that team environment where everyone's like egging each other on, like really pushing the energy forward. We have some good energy people like Som and Bented are really good at just getting everyone with them and really building up how the team's going to operate. So I think that did stunt us initially. But I think we're a little bit better now. We've adapted. As you said, we did pretty well in the Road to Rio going on. But yeah, I think we've recovered. It was initially a bit of a hiccup, particularly with the LA servers at Flashpoint when Dabs had to go home. He had an insane ping, like 100. So it was definitely difficult. But yeah, I think we've we've worked out how we want to go our team environment moving forward, and I think it's really helped, particularly in the road to Rio so far. So yeah, I think it was a good recovery by us and a nice adaptation.
In terms of some of those losses you mentioned in Flashpoint, what do you think is sort of the biggest hole in this team right now? What do you think needs to be the biggest improvement, given you are the coach?
I guess just consistency. We have a lot of the strategy we need. We have all our defaults set out, any of the set pieces, our CTs. We've talked a lot about our CT side, knowing how to react to certain situations. So we have all this stuff. It's just a matter of making sure that we remember it and apply it all the time. So there's some games where we just, for some reason, we just forget what we need to do. And we need to try and remind each other, or I have to try and remind the players, like, yo, we're not doing stuff like we've talked about or we've done in practice, and it's costing us rounds right now. So just that consistency is a big thing. I know it's probably a pretty common answer, but just making sure we can do things repetitively and make sure that we're always in our A game and not making those mistakes that we have talked about. Because obviously that also builds frustration with your teammates. When you see your teammate making an error that we've talked about and you know we've talked about it, it's obviously frustrating. That kind of affects the team environment a little bit. So yeah, just making sure everyone's switched on all the time is probably the biggest thing for us moving forward.
Seemed for a while there that North American Counter-Strike in particular was a little top-heavy. You had Liquid and you had Evil Geniuses, and then it was kind of just a bag of everyone else, right? But one of the interesting things about your team has been sort of this gradual growth. There are a lot of players on the Gen G team who either previously they didn't get the right opportunity for their skill. I'm thinking of people like Kusta, obviously, who has been on some good teams, but never really been pushed to that next level, I think, in terms of international competition, but is a really good player and has been a prospect for a while that people think very highly of, right? And then you have some young players like Som, who is up and coming, is very talented, and this is really his first shot to make this break and really break out as a young player. And you were the assistant coach of this team with C9 prior to the sale, and you went along with them. So what do you think has been sort of the biggest thing that's been contributing to your growth the past few months? And I guess sort of where do you think this team can go in terms of overall performance as is?
I think one of the biggest things that obviously contributes to the growth is just how much we do talk about things. We spend a lot of time like working with the players. The younger players, such as Som, as you said, he's a great attitude, which helps with the growth. Like if you tell him something, say, I think you should have done this better, or this is a great idea for you moving forward. He's very good at bringing it on board and applying that in the future. So that's a great quality of Som, and I think that really helps with our growth, having that younger player. I think it's always good having that X factor player on a team, which is what Som kind of is for us. Is that younger player that's a little bit less known about him. So when you have a player with a great attitude who also has some great aim, he's able to really elevate us and move us forward. And obviously to get him a better level, he's got to develop more. Even players like Bentet, who are maybe a little bit more experienced, he's obviously coming out of the Asian region, which is a little bit different as far as how they set things up, how they like to play the game. So he's still actually learning, and he has a similar quality to Som, where he's very good at taking stuff on board and applying it to the game itself. So I think those two players adapting and developing moving forward is going to push us even further. I think Daps and Automatic, obviously, they can still improve. They're obviously a little bit more known quantities, so you know what you're going to get out of them, what they're going to push into the server. So if they keep being consistent, that's good. And the last player, the one you mentioned, Kusta, he's always been a good player. Like he really understands the game and he makes smart decisions. And it actually confuses me a little bit when you look back and look at how he's maybe underperformed on previous teams he's been on. But then I look at him in the server, look at the decisions he makes, how he supports his team. He clearly thinks about it and he has a good understanding of how to play the game, and he's like that great piece just having a team to fill. Like you always know if you're playing a site with Kusta or he's with you entering a site, you always know he's going to do the right thing and he's going to hit his shot when he needs to. So that's what I saw both in this team. Obviously I see it, and I also saw when I was over at Cloud9 as the assistant coach. It always confused me, obviously coming in from the outside a little bit and hearing these things about Kusta and seeing like maybe him not have the best results sometimes. Then you get in a server with him, see what he's doing on the TeamSpeak, what he's doing in the server itself, how he's helping out his team. It's just, yeah, he's just a great element to have on the team. And I think if he just keeps doing that, it's going to be great for our consistency moving forward and developing.
This weekend was interesting. We saw Team Liquid actually not not go as far as we thought. Obviously, they ended up in the third place match and lost. And a lot of people reacted very strongly. People think that any North American tournament, Team Liquid should wash, right? Because they are historically the best North American Counter-Strike team. I think you can say that with a fair amount of certainty. Cloud9 obviously had its large moments in the past with the major win and everything else, but Liquid has been the consistent there for years, for a number of years. Do you think that that is sort of a byproduct of playing online? Do you think that's sort of an outlier for them based off what you saw this weekend? What are your thoughts?
I think it's a mixture of the two. I think it is a bit of an outlier, but obviously the online element makes it so any team can really beat anyone. It is less consistent. I think everyone knows that. That's why LAN is considered to be where everyone really shows what they've got. Obviously, with the whole situation in the world right now, it's obviously a difficult time for some people to be playing, focusing on things. So there's a lot of elements going into it. I would still consider them the best team in North America. So yeah, as I said, it's definitely an outlier, I think. But obviously the situation helps with upsets and helps in some of these younger teams coming in, such as Cloud9 beating them. And I think they also got destroyed by teams like Furia and maybe even someone else in the group stage. So I think it's a combination of all those different factors, I think.
How much of an impact do you think online play will have in the overall ecosystem of Counter-Strike? Do you think when we look at the HLTV rankings from, say, like January, and then we compare them to next time these teams meet on LAN, which at this point could even November, which is when the major is planned, is sort of like hopeful, I think, in some ways, right? Like we see a lot of, especially with all the travel involved coming from various different countries to Brazil. But in terms of, if you look at January or February before the pandemic got really bad in most Western countries versus where we're going to be next time we play on LAN, what is your sort of prediction? Do you think some teams will rise, fall off? Any in particular you think will get better or worse?
I'm not sure about in particular teams, but I think there will definitely be a shuffle of some teams. Like I think you'll still see teams such as Astralis, Fnatic, some of those teams they'll stick around the top. Like they're still good teams. There'll just be a little bit more of this random element. You'll see some teams fall off. I mean, some Mouse Sports just come like second last in their group in Europe or something. So they're gonna obviously that's not going to be good for their rankings. You're going to see some of those good teams fall off. Some of them that'll stick around. They'll fare well online. So I think it's really a team by team basis and how they do adapt. And for all I know, Mouse Sports come out and they win the next event. Like it's just. Yeah, it is random. I think you will definitely see a mix-up in the rankings. It's just hard to know who will fall and who will rise, really.
You spoke about the momentum sort of stunting a little bit at the beginning of the quarantine, but for you all, do you think it makes it better or worse for you in particular?
I think it's worse for us overall. It's not like a massive negative. I don't think we're one of the teams that can't play online. I mean, such as you saw just over the weekend. But I think overall we definitely prefer playing on LAN. It's definitely better to be with the team. We showed we could perform under pressure at DreamHack Anaheim on that LAN stage. So yeah, overall I think it is a slight negative for us, but we're not one of those teams that I think is going to be hit like super, super hard by it or anything.
In terms of where you think Gen.G is at right now, where do you think or I guess where do you think you are in the sort of crazy NA Counter-Strike ecosystem right now in terms of performance and skill? Do you think you're up there with some of the best? Do you think you're somewhere in the middle? What are your thoughts?
I think as far as an NA, I'd still, despite this week's performance, I'd still put Liquid as number one by quite a distance. I think after that though, it's definitely a lot more in the mix where I'd put us like second or maybe around third. I think 100 Thieves have fallen off hugely. Like as far as NA, they're down there a lot more. Obviously, Evil Geniuses is the other good team, the other big team in North America. Obviously, we were able to beat them. They're still a very tough opponent, but them as well, they haven't been performing very well. So I think I'd probably put ourselves maybe around that 2 to 4 range. Obviously, you'd throw MIBR or Furia in there as well. And I think Liquid still sits on top as number one, but I think anywhere from 2 to 4 is where I'd put us in that mix with those other teams definitely able to compete at the moment.
Well, Chris, Elma Puddy, we appreciate you joining us. We wish you best of luck. Please stay safe in Los Angeles as all of this continues on. And best of luck to Gen.G in the future online competitions that are upcoming, including DreamHack Masters here shortly. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
And that is it for us talking with Elma Puddy. We thank him again for joining us. We do have an interview with Kasper Hvidt coming up from the Astralis group, who own Astralis, Origin, and Future FC. We had a chance to talk to him. We did have to pre-record because it's very late in Europe right now. We had a chance to talk to him earlier in the day. And he's talked a little bit about sort of his hope that Counter-Strike rosters expand to 10-man rosters and have alternate subs and player burnout and everything else and how to address that. But I wanted to address one thing before we get into that. So if you didn't pay attention this weekend, if you lived a little bit under a rock in Counter-Strike, this weekend there was a podcast that FaZe Banks appeared on in which he talked about owning CSGO Wild. And sort of the framing of the way that he discussed it was the fact that basically like he was looking for internet kids who could turn profits in businesses and could make something out of, finesse is the word that really kind of got to me. We do have a clip that we are going to play of this interview real quick, and then I'll give my capital O opinion on this. But I did a lot of reporting on this, and I sort of wanted to circle back given the new development. So here's the clip.
Or double majors from God knows what, and they did this, and they have their MBA in this, but the way he did it, that's a movie. That's a movie.
Yeah, no, you guys want to hear some movie some shit? These kids, Zach Gage, they're these twins, and my buddy Drew. These are the guys who I first initially moved into this house with in LA. They're all right now probably like 22, 23-ish, around that area, but they all dropped out of high school, all three of them. One of them's from Virginia, the other two kids are from Canada, and we actually have a crazy history. Before I joined FaZe, I ran a competitive sniping forum called Sniper Leaderboards, and these two twin kids who were like 15 at the time ran like our biggest competition. And we used to talk mad to each other, never saw their faces, hated these kids. And then years later, you know what I mean, I went and did my FaZe thing, and they were still doing well on the internet, and we kind of like reconnected. And around this time, Counter-Strike was kind of the game. And there were a lot of these like gambling websites with skins. Like, I don't know if you guys know anything about that, but there's like a currency in Counter-Strike and it's skins. There's a real market for it. And some of these skins, like a skin for like the sniper or like a knife or whatever, some of these go upwards of like $10,000 on the open market. Like people pay actual like $10,000 USD for a little picture on a screen. And it makes no sense, but if you really like dive into like the mechanics of it, like you have to buy a case, and then you have to buy a key, and then you have a 1 in 10,000 chance to get this knife. So if you add it all up, the amount of money spent getting one of these skins, you know what I mean? Yeah. So there's a whole real market. It's a real thing, and you can trade these freely between, you know what I mean? I could send you one of these skins, whatever. So with that, people started creating these like gambling sites where you could gamble with these skins. And it was kind of like gray area because it's a skin in the game and there's no actual real like value to it. Like the government puts absolutely no value to it. So we came up with this idea with these kids. I came up with this idea for a different way to do it. And we branded it the right way. And my motivation for doing it actually was, at the time we weren't making enough money to buy a CSGO team. All in, the venture was going to cost us like $1 million, and we definitely did not have anything close to that. So my brain, like we got to finesse it. We got to figure out how to make the money to buy this team now, because in the next 6 months, year, this team's going to be worth like $4 or $5 million, and we're not going to be able to get into this game, which in our heads we need to get in this game. So we create this website, and through our rake and all this, we were making like $200,000 a day. And we set it up in Antigua. We set it up in Antigua. I had a house in Antigua for like.
Where's that?
For like Antigua, like in the Caribbean.
Island, yeah.
Where?
It's an island.
It's one of those like islands where they.
The best.
It's an island in the Caribbean where where gambling, where running a gambling website is completely legal if you have the permits and stuff to do it. So we flew there. We flew there private. Sat down with the guy who runs the country. Basically paid him like $100,000, and he gave us the license. And we had this whole estate. And we had guys with, because this place is crazy. Like if you don't live at the top of the hill in one of these like crazy estate mansions, like you live in a favela, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And everything's crazy. A bottle of water is like $5, and my buddy broke his iPhone out there and had to spend like 2 racks on it. And we had like a little Cherokee that we were driving around. It cost us 80 G's. Like everything, it's just like this little like piece of land that like nobody gives about. Right. There's no money to be made, so like whatever. But yeah, we were out there and ran this website for a few months, and then the whatever, it was all regulated and shut down. And we were the only ones who were doing it legitimate, so we shut our down. And there's still people who are doing it, making crazy money.
Talking on the Bad News podcast about CSGO Wild, and as you heard, the framing of the discussion was really interesting. He framed it as finding people, and he talked about these 2 Canadian kids and a friend of his who he met, who were high school dropouts who like could break or finesse the internet. And for those who are unfamiliar with the backstory, back in 2015, 16, and 17, there was sort of a huge debacle around Counter-Strike skins gambling. If you're unfamiliar with Counter-Strike, I doubt you're watching this show, but we'll go over it very, very quickly, how this works. So essentially, there are skins in Counter-Strike. These skins can be purchased on Steam Market. They used to be able to be purchased on third-party markets like OP skins and some others for actual money. They can be purchased on Steam for actual money, to be clear also. You get these skins by opening a case with a key. You have to purchase the key, and your shot of getting a really crappy skin worth 15 cents or less is pretty high. Your shot of getting a very rare skin like a knife or a very nice op skin or AK-47 skin, whatever it may be, is very, very low. And therefore, when you get one of these, there's a significant value because the odds are very, very low. What CSGO Wild and CSGO Lotto and some of these other websites did is essentially they allowed you to connect your Steam account, and you could take those skins, you could put them onto this marketplace, and you could gamble them away. There was a couple of different exposés by the YouTuber Honor the Call in the summer of 2016, the first being against CSGO Lotto, which is another website which essentially was being advertised by a bunch of different influencers. Among those influencers were T. Martin, Syndicate, and Josh OG, who were playing it on their stream on Twitch, who were playing on YouTube. And all in all, it came out later by Honor the Call looking at their Florida operating licenses that they all were officers of this company and therefore owned a certain percentage and were advertising this, not telling anyone. And when they won the big $2,000 knife on their stream, probably wasn't legit. And the kicker of all of this, why this is such an important discussion, is because that Steam account has no age restrictions whatsoever. So you could be a 12-year-old, and my colleague Sean Azale did a very thorough story on this for ESPN the magazine. You could be a 12-year-old betting with your parents' credit card and throwing all this away. There were a bunch of different sites that did this. CSGO Wild was one of these, and Honor the Call got messages from other YouTubers and influencers who got messages from FaZe Banks and from FaZe Rain, another owner of FaZe Clan, saying that essentially they were owners of this other website and they would love to partner with them to be able to promote their website and be able to help them make more money. For a very long time, up until yesterday, FaZe Banks said that he had nothing to do with any of this. Denied all of it. Called Honor the Call a liar, called everyone else, Richard Lewis, DK, others, myself, full of crap, and was very, very strong about how all of us were wrong. We were all making this up. And at the end, all of us were right. This dude did exactly what he just said he did on that podcast. And he's bragging about it. He has zero remorse whatsoever. Clearly. The worst part about that entire podcast, and what makes me really upset, is that he's talking about being a mentor and being a business owner, giving opportunity to young people. There are a lot of young people on his actual FaZe Clan roster. There's Ewok, who I greatly respect. She is one of the most influential streamers. If you're unfamiliar with her, she's a deaf Fortnite streamer. She does a lot of work with people who have disabilities. She's a great role model for both young girls and for people who are disabled. She is amazing. There are other people on that roster like High Sky and like Mongrel. All these people, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, and they are being mentored and in the same ecosystem as this dude who's literally talking about exploiting children while having children that he employs. And he even says in that interview at some point that he doesn't care if you introduce him to some executive at Monster. He doesn't care if his CEO does that. What he cares about is being introduced to some internet kid, as he would say, who can finesse the internet. So that's the way he views this, as finessing the internet. Basically scamming children is finessing the internet to him. So he doesn't have any remorse at all. He shouldn't be a role model. And the worst kicker, this is the worst part of all of it. Guess what he said he needed the money for? to buy the Counter-Strike roster from G2 Esports that they taught in. As you heard, he said that they were looking at $1 million acquisition. I remember reporting on that in 2016. That was to buy a roster from G2, who was one of the best rosters in the world. So not only is he taking people's money and not disclosing any of this and running an illegal gambling site based in Antigua and said that he went and paid an official to get a license. No, all of that. Not only is he doing that, but he's using it to buy, or used it to buy a competitive team from another roster to get in the scene. This guy's a leech, man. He doesn't come from Counter-Strike. I don't like being a gatekeeper like that. Look, I'm not originally from Counter-Strike either. I'm a huge fan of this game. I've covered this game for a number of years. I play this game a ton. But guess what? I don't want to be a gatekeeper like that. But when someone comes into this scene from somewhere else, and I love Call of Duty, that's where I come from. I like covering Call of Duty. I'm from Atlanta. I've done a lot of coverage of Atlanta FaZe since they started, but this is ridiculous. We already knew these types of people came into the scene and leached off of it and took advantage of these kids who had access to this virtual currency. And now to hear that, it's like it's a scheme to him. Like it's nothing. Like he didn't do anything wrong. He absolutely did something wrong. Finessing the internet, my ass. Dude literally took advantage of tons of people while simultaneously now trying to be a role model to some of the best influencers we have in this space who are under the age of 18. That's ridiculous. I just want to take that brief pause. Let that soak in for a second. We do actually have an interview with Kasper Hvidt, the director of sport for the Astralis group. They own Astralis, they own Origin, they own Future FC. Today, they announced that Hugi is joining Astralis, the 7th player. Him and his 3-tag will be joining the roster. This is a big move for them. This is a roster who's won a bunch of major championships. The core is stayed relatively the same. And we talked a lot about various different player burnout, player consistency, how they monitor that, how the culture is changing with these additions. Really insightful interview, maybe a little businessy, but we always appreciate people like him coming onto the show and sort of talking at that level of depth. So without further ado, we'll throw this to Kasper Hvidt as he talks about Astralis' move to pick up Hugi and ES3 tag. We're now joined by Kasper Hvidt, the director of sport for the Astralis group, the owners of Astralis, Origin, and Future FC, and we're here to talk some Counter-Strike. We booked this interview, Kasper, prior to Hugi being announced of joining Astralis. You now have 7 players on your roster when everything's said and done by the end of the summer. What has been the what's been the reasoning behind the move to 7 players instead of 5?
We want to make sure that Astralis are able to deliver good performances on a long-term basis. And to do that, we have seen that having only 5 players is a risk. No human being is on top 24/7, 365. And to deliver top performances and to be able to stay in, let's say, top 3 in the world for a longer period than just a couple of years. We think the right move is to adjust the roster, to add players to the roster, just as we have seen in other games like League of Legends, for example, or in other sports. It would be unthinkable to think about Los Angeles Lakers without a bench, only 5 players. One having a hamstring, now he just have to keep on playing even though he's half injured. It appears only in Counter-Strike. So our main reason is to assure top performance so Astralis can be in the top 3 of the world for a long time, and not only today or tomorrow.
You know, it's been one interesting point in Counter-Strike, as you mentioned, that players seem almost disposable to a lot of both orgs and amongst each other, right? When there's either a little bit of tension, a player is booted out of the team really quickly, or you see, you know, when a player is burnt out, either mentally or physically, or their body is giving out, you know, wrist issue, whatever it may be, repetitive motion injury, we see those players just get thrown in the trash like it's nothing, and that, you know, they're on another team. Astralis has sort of been better about this the past few years, but the roster historically has been a part of that, like the shuffling, right? When every single time, like the Danish teams are shuffling amongst each other, and we see them players go from one to another. Why do you think that's unique to Counter-Strike? Why do you think it's so quick to make a change at the snap of the fingers rather than sort of like trying to work things out long term?
I think many teams were built by players. for players. And normally when you see sports teams built from the ground, you start off with a management and then a coach, and then you add the players. So the power is among the management and the coach, and not by the players. And I think actually it's better for everybody, because what you just explained is what's going on in the schoolyard when the children have to find the way of controlling each other among each other with no teachers among them, you know. So I think what we are trying to build in Astralis, and what I actually believe we achieved, and I think the results are talking for themselves, is maintain the same roster, and it's our responsibilities as the management to take care of the players, their mental health, their physical health, and that is actually what we are trying to do by adding one or now two players. And as we have 5 different positions in Counter-Strike, I think it's reasonable to have more than just one player, because you need to cover more or less all the positions that we have in the team.
You know, this team at its core has been together for a long time. It's won a number of different major titles together, the core of the Astralis roster. From your perspective, though, have you seen player burnout and sort of the mental stress that comes with sort of that both high expectation and high performance repeatedly? And sort of what are some of the things you all have been doing to address that when it arises?
But I think the first thing we did years ago was to take a look at the calendar again, and not the calendar control us, but we control the calendar. And by that, we reduced the numbers of tournament we attended, simply to have less days traveling, to have more time for preparing, to have some additional small breaks, not only the big player breaks during the year, but small breaks, to actually make it easier to be a Counter-Strike player. And it's not easy. The players are under a lot of pressure, especially from the rest of the team. If you feel that you're not able to do it, you feel the burden of everybody on your shoulders, because if you can't, the team will fall. Just as you said, you will change a player and you have to start all over again. And that pressure is tremendous. So I think just by adding one player, everybody would feel, okay, it's allowed to have the flu. It's not a problem. I can't play tonight because there's another one. Or even the burnout situations. I think the last roster we see with that was Vitality, where they had to let go of a really talented player because he was simply not able to deliver. And I think actually, as a director of sports, it's my responsibility that that doesn't happen to any of my players, as human beings and as employees, of course, as well.
You know, if I remember correctly from talking to some of your players the past few years, you guys do sort of use more of the facility / office environment where players live separately from one another, and they come in and they commute and practice, and in an office environment alongside management and coaching. So it's not like you're having to worry about a quarantine lockdown of a team house per se amid the coronavirus. But I'm sure there's been alterations in the way that Astralis and some of your other teams, Origin, et cetera, are operating amid this pandemic. How has that gone? What sort of measures have you all been taking? And I guess how has it affected daily life for Astralis, the team?
I think it affected them as everybody else. Our players, as you just explained, they live at home, not close to each other, 2 in Copenhagen, 3 guys far from Copenhagen. So they had to adjust to the online life, which was actually the life they knew from 2-3 years ago. And I think they managed to do well. We talked, of course, about the circumstances regarding the game. Suddenly a game seems like a prank because you're sitting in the same environment and you're not seeing your teammates. We talked about communication, which is one of the most important tools all the time. But especially when you can't see your teammates sitting one next to each other, you can only hear them. You have to take care of which signals do you actually send to your teammates when they're only able to hear you and can't see you. So these were some of the things we were discussing before before these new online formats.
You know, I've spent a lot of time around your players over the years at tournaments and various different events. Pretty level-headed guys. I've met some hot-headed players in my time. I would not classify the majority of Astralis as those type. But, you know, there's always one thing I think many people would be interested to know is as you're adding S3 Tag and Huhi, they're looking at an environment where, you know, someone could be benched for a long period of time if they underperform or if something goes wrong. Do you think that there's any, like, concern from a player, whether that be not necessarily jealousy, but in terms of them being concerned for their job long term with these additions, and sort of, I guess, what has that discussion been like around longevity within the organization, even if you're not playing?
You're completely right that when you change culture, and that is what we are doing, this is a huge cultural change, of course. You have to talk about it. Why do we do it? But as you know, pro sports, which is the case we're talking about, nobody is assured their place if they can't deliver. And that is exactly the same thing here. Our job is not to have 5 players winning tournaments. My job is to have Astralis winning tournaments with 5 players. It doesn't have to be 5 specific players, but 5 players capable of delivering 100%. So if you see it as a player, adding players, yes, it could be a possibility to get benched, but it could be a possibility as well to have time to prepare for every game. So when you actually go to a game, you feel 100% prepared, both physically, mentally, everything, you know, so you don't have these fatigues that we see all players have, but they just have to keep on running because the calendar demands it. So I think you can see it both ways, and it will be for some, in some periods, help, because you can have 1 or 2 weeks off, you can have 1 day off every week, whatever. But for others, we will have times where all the 7 players are capable of delivering. And yes, then it's 2 players on the bench because of tactical reasons or because of they were simply in that moment chosen as the 2 worst players.
There was a couple months ago a little bit of sort of nasty back and forth about the S3 Tag transfer situation. Obviously, in the middle of a sale from Heroic to Fun Plus Phoenix, and then that sort of altered things because Fun Plus Phoenix played in Flashpoint without contracts with those players, which I have very strong opinions on that. We'll leave those on the table, but I sort of want to I want to hear where that stands now with you all. I know Heroic Management was threatening legal litigation and various different things at various different points. I'm sort of wondering where you stand now on that transfer. Is he still set to join in July 1st? Where are you at now?
Yeah, Patrick is to join 1st of July. We're looking forward to that. To be honest, I don't know nothing about the sale or the situation or allegations or anything. What we were looking for is a player capable of playing multiple positions. As I said before, we have 5 positions, but we don't have 5 subs, as is the case in League of Legends, for example. So we were looking for a player who were capable of doing several positions, and we think we found one. He played in-game leader. He was AWP. He was entry frag in the past. We know him from Heroic. I was his sport director in Heroic as well. And actually, it's kind of the same with Yuki. We know what those 2 players are capable of delivering. And that was like, we know them as persons. So for us, it was an easy choice because of the qualities both players had.
You just mentioned, that was what was going to be my next question about sort of where Danish Counter-Strike stands right now. Heroic is the second most successful team behind Astralis. I think many would consider them and Mad Lions, who are primarily Danish as well. But when you look at sort of what the landscape is for Danish Counter-Strike, it's changed a lot from the days when it was Astralis, Heroic, and North. And we've seen North take a little bit of a backseat also. What do you think, though, for young talent, for younger Counter-Strike players in Denmark? What do you think the system looks like for them now if they're trying to break into the scene and join one of these top teams if they're talented enough?
I think the scene is huge. We have a lot of talent, and Counter-Strike is really famous in Denmark because of the success of Astralis. We have succeeded building up a brand which can compare or can measure itself with the biggest football soccer clubs here in Copenhagen and in Denmark. The jersey launch, we sell more Astralis jerseys in the first weekend of the jersey launch than the biggest football club in Denmark. That means that there is big opportunities for the talent, and many players wants to try to achieve the success. And I am actually really happy that now you mentioned some of the good teams. Mad Lions just won Flashpoint. But yesterday evening we saw Copenhagen Flames, which is a team nobody really knows, with young guys fighting their one part of to make it, and they actually made it into top 4 in the ESL 1 in Europe. I think we will see many more Danish players, and you have mentioned some, but we have Danish players around the world as well. I think the scene is huge, and we have a lot of talent.
So it sounds like 7 is not going to be the end of this potential expansion here. Earlier pre-call, you were talking about some of the other games that have 10-man rosters, and obviously I don't think you would be expanding in the way that you are if you didn't want to cultivate young talent and more, talent less experienced than the major champions that are on your team to potentially become major champions themselves one day. So I want to ask, when you're evaluating these players who are maybe not as successful as the Duprees and Devices and Glaves of the world, what are you looking for in these people as you look to bring them into your culture?
We are doing some personality tests and behavior tests. So first of all, since we have, I think I can say without touching anybody's nerves or feelings that we have the best Counter-Strike team in the world. We have to find people suitable for that roster, and we build that roster, and we have chosen Magis, for example, with the same test. So we find 5 personalities and now 7 capable of working together. So we don't have internal fights before we go and fight the opponent, but we find the opponent and everybody doing their part of the job to win the games. That's the first part. One of the things you just addressed, I sincerely hope that Valve and the whole Counter-Strike community could consider opening up for example, academy teams, where the good teams showing the path that all the talents have to follow, where the good teams are allowed to have a second team for the young talents, where we can show them the good ethics, the good education, the good training habits, the good lifestyle habits, so to speak, to create the best base for the entire community. That is my dream with this, is that, okay, we are first movers, but we were first movers with other things as well. But I think that the talent, the raw talent, and for example, you just touched the talents in Denmark, they deserve this chance. And I think the system as it is right now is good, but it could be, we could consider changing it a little, maybe by watching other games. What did they actually do and what worked a lot? We saw Cloud9 in League of Legends last season suddenly changing some of the older players for the young guys in the academy, and suddenly they actually did really well at Worlds because they were there and they were in the system. I like that thought, and I think we have seen in the States as well that thought about academy teams is useful in other sports. So I think I really hope we could consider kind of cultural change, not only us, but everybody, considering we could change for better, both for the organizations, but first of all as well for the well-being of the players. So we don't see these fatigues. We don't see people that we just throw them to the churchyard of Counter-Strike, so to speak, but we try to create an environment where it's actually good for the players and healthy for the players to be a part of it. That is my dream.
Do you think you are going to limit that as you sort of look at what's out there and potentially recruiting more players? Do you think you limit that to the search of Denmark? I mean, Counter-Strike is a very nationalistic game. People really like some of the most successful teams are obviously Danish, Swedish, Brazilian, etc. Do you think that that's very limited to sort of the Danish Counter-Strike scene, or you think you would think outside the box and potentially recruit elsewhere in Europe or across the world?
It depends on the opportunity, but right now it's really easy for us to talk Danish, to communicate in Danish, because half a second where you just have to consider one word, what is it actually in English, or you say a word which doesn't really fulfill what you want to say in Danish. Those translations, you miss small details because of the language. And small details actually decide, do you win a major or do you lose it? In a split second, you know. So right now we don't consider changing, not because of nationality, but simply because of the language.
Well, thank you so much, Kasper, for joining us. Best of luck.
My pleasure.
Best of luck with your new roster, or your expanded roster, and congratulations for netting #1 in the world again recently. Last I looked on HLTV after a couple of months out of that spot. Thank you so much for joining us. That has been it here with Kasper. We'll be right back. That'll do it for us here on the ECO, the ESPN Esports Counter-Strike Global Offensive Show. This is Jacob Wolf. I have been very, very honored to be here with you. Many more of these to come. We will be back every single week. I know we've been on a little bit of a break, but thank you so much for joining us. Hear my rant, putting up with me, putting up with all of us. Thank you very much. Thank you to Kasper Hvidt for joining us. Thank you for Elma Puddy for joining us also earlier in the show. You can find VOD content like this show if you missed part of it and want to rewatch at youtube.com/ESPN Esports. We will be live throughout the rest of the week. We do have regular programming on this Twitch channel, including tomorrow, the Riff Rewind at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We're doing a fantasy draft for League of Legends across the world with me, Emily Rand, Tyler Erzberger, and Arda Ocal. Very, very excited. That is 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow here on this channel. We'll have more content throughout the week, Call of Duty content, other games, so stay tuned here. And for all of our journalism and other great things, you can find us on twitter.com/ESPN Esports. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.